Welcome, James.
Hey, Andre. How you doing?
Pretty good. How are things in Stockholm today?
They're okay, thanks. Yeah. Typical December day. Gray.
Perfect
And a
weather to
little bit
work on
cold, but
IoT
it's fine.
solutions.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. James, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I hope, well, first of all, of course, thank you so much to Hautien for inviting me to come and speak today and kick things off. I know it's going to be a really interesting summit, and I'm sure that we're all going to learn a lot. So yeah, my job really is to talk today about the impact of IoT, and I want to put that in the context of building design and user experience. So let's get on with it. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is a question I do often hear, throughout the industry and for many years. What is a smart building? And, it's a question, of course, with many answers. And a lot of the answers I tend to hear seem to focus on some narrow definition of what, system is in the building or is not in the building. And, in my humble opinion, it's a bit of a waste of time. It's the wrong question, essentially. And I think a better question is that we should be asking, what is the purpose of that building? And more importantly, is that building fulfilling its purpose? So it's not really about technology in a way. It's about the purpose of the building, what it's doing, and how it's impacting the people that are using the building. So really, that's the theme for my talk today. So can I have the next slide, please? Now, I'm going to hazard a guess, right, that everyone on the line probably knows exactly what it's like to be in a building that does not fulfill its purpose. I mean, take a look around you. I don't know where you are. I imagine a lot of you are probably working from home today. What's it like? Is it too cold? Is there noise distracting you? Can you concentrate? Or are you maybe checking your email while you're listening to me? I mean, is the purpose of the room set up for work? See, I think as an industry, we've done a great job of delivering output, but not outcomes. And this is what technology needs to help us change. Can we go on to the next slide, please? So to help us explain that, this is a simplified view of what the average life cycle of a commercial building might look like. And what I've done, if you look along the top, you can see a timeline there of build, design, operate, and maintain, those phases of the building. This design and build phase roughly could take somewhere between 4 to 5 years. The operate and maintain phase could be average of 65 years. I'm reliably informed for, let's say, US office buildings. And then below that, what we've tried to do is to show some of the key stakeholders that are involved in this process. So during the design phase, of course, we need an investor, someone who's a visionary for the project. Also, maybe an owner operator, somebody who is, a company that wants to not just own the building, but also inhabit it afterwards, or maybe a developer. And then, of course, at some point, they're going to commission a design team. And that will be most likely made up of an architect, structural engineer, building services engineer, and some quantity surveyors. Then, once the design has been worked on, at some point as we move into the build phase, or no doubt before, a main contractor will be appointed. Then what you generally find is that from that point, these contracts cascade down towards, of course, the suppliers and the subcontractors. These are the companies that are responsible for delivering some part of the building. And many, of course, will be delivering and installing technology. And really, part of what we're describing here is a legal framework. A lot of it's contractual, a lot of it's about mitigating risk. No one really wants to get left, being responsible if there's some issue along the way. And of course, like most projects, price is really important within this. This, unfortunately, is often a low margin business. And what you can see from time to time is systems get engineered out in order to, make sure that some profit is made on the project. And finally, at the bottom there, you can see what is called the plan of work stages. This is something that was come up with by an organization called RIBA, the Royal Institute for British Architects. And they envisaged these 7 stages of work through to in use there. The most important of these, of course, is 6. That's the practical completion and handover, which is the point at which all those stakeholders there on the left-hand side get to finish and hand over the building to whoever is responsible for the operate and maintain phase of it. And then they get to go and work on their next new building. But of course, that's not really the reality, right? This building then is still around for, on average, 65 years. It's basically the start of its life. So I think, really, it says something about some of the mindset within the industry that, we have this one phase to describe the 65-year operate and maintain, and 6 to describe just this, 5-year design and build phase. And if you consider then how that fits in with, the systems that are installed in this building during that operate and maintain phase, how often should things be replaced and refurbished? And then consider the software, how's that dealt with? How should that be patched? How often should that be updated? And, I think what we can consider here is that this process of delivery that you can see here has not been, of course, designed to deliver complex technical systems. Can we see the next slide, please? So let's contrast that with the aviation industry. No one talks about a smart aircraft, do they? We think of an aircraft as intrinsically smart. And I guess on the face of it, this may not seem like a particularly fair comparison, but in a lot of respects, the two industries have things in common. I think we're both delivering highly sophisticated product to market, and that's combining mechanical and now increasingly cyber systems. If we take one company, for example, Rolls-Royce, unfortunately not doing too well at the moment, but that's, of course, not their fault. Issues with COVID. They are an important part of the aviation supply chain. They make engines, but they don't actually sell engines, they sell time. They lease their engines to carriers, and they're responsible then for all the maintenance and diagnostics associated with that engine. These things are now absolutely packed with real-time sensors. There's no handover, no design, no build, maintain phases. It's one managed service. Next slide, please. So this kind of joined up approach to data is unfortunately less common in the building industry. And as this analogy shows, data in building systems is often in silos. It's unlikely that, for example, the company who installs, let's say, an access control system is going to be the same company who installs the lighting or the building management system. And if systems aren't integrated, they're much less likely to share data, don't operate, of course, to their full potential, and importantly, they're not going to deliver the best return on investment to the customer. But I'm glad to say things are changing. Of course, some of these huge macro technological trends like Moore's Law and leading into better sensor capabilities are giving us the digital tools that we can use to understand and interpret the built environment. So, if you will, a feedback loop, right? So we're collecting the data, we're understanding it, and then we're making autonomous decisions to improve our environment. And that is essentially what the Internet of Things is all about. Next slide, please. So you can see here a mapping that we've done as part of our research. And this is shows some of the technical systems in buildings and, loosely how they relate to each other. There are 6 lines on this slide, essentially facilities, lighting, energy, security, and what we've called user experience. And then finally, business enterprise. And if I just take one particular part from this, you'll see I've highlighted on this a red box that includes occupancy analytics. We've done some research in that area this year, and there alone we found 220 suppliers of systems globally. And we estimate that portion of the market is worth somewhere in the region of 2.2 billion. And we're seeing some really solid growth there in these type of applications of IoT. And even through the pandemic, they've shown that we can use this data efficiently to help, make sure buildings are safe and maintain some social distancing. Now, and we're pretty convinced now that we're going to see a massive proliferation of connected devices in commercial office and commercial real estate. Next slide, please. So what does this kind of look like in reality? Well, here is a photo I took of the ceiling of my office building. And, roughly you'll just go through and look at some of the things that are up there. If we look at the top left corner, what you can see there is a multifunctional control unit that supports different communication protocols like BATnet and Modbus. Then below that, of course, you can see all of that IP cabling carrying all the data, no doubt from the enterprise systems as well. Then on the right-hand side, an air duct, part of the HVAC system, and then highlighted like a halfway down there as well is a damper actuator, which again helps to control the airflow and the temperature and all that good stuff in the building. And then various other things as well. We're seeing some IP video cameras there at the bottom, some fire systems, both fire suppression, and then the red box, if you can see that, that's fire detection. And then finally, you have to trust me on this one, but at the bottom right, an occupancy sensor. That's using IR to detect movement, which can be used for various reasons. Next slide, please. This is a quote I think is super interesting, and I think this really typifies some of the change in mindset that we're seeing around user experience in buildings. It's from a company called Arm, a UK company who design chips, and this comes from their workplace innovation department. Work is a thing you do, not a place you go. And you can see, I think, really from this quote that they don't think of their facilities as just bricks and mortar. They really do think of them, in terms of user experience. Are they providing the optimal environment for their people to do their best work? And next slide shows another example of this. This comes from an Ericsson sustainability report. If we can see that. Next slide. Thank you. If you look at the top right there, they talk about their smart office concept. And this concept, which is based on the Internet of Things, aims to improve employee experience in the workplace, for example, by optimizing air quality and temperature. As I said, this comes from their sustainability report. So, they're taking this kind of stuff really seriously. And on to my next slide. As I get towards the end of my presentation, I think I wanted to ask a question. Will dumb buildings become stranded assets in this new climate economy? And what do I mean by that? Well, basically, is widespread adoption of energy efficient buildings or even net zero energy buildings achievable without IoT? I don't think so. I think the IoT is going to absolutely be a big part of us producing more energy efficient buildings. And why is this important? Well, there's several reasons. I think firstly, we're definitely going to see more climate change legislation coming down the track. I mean, already in countries like Netherlands, we're seeing legislation around office buildings that's saying that they need to meet some minimum energy performance requirements before they can be rented out. to any tenant. And also, as well as that, I think from a financial perspective, what we're going to see is an increasing use of property data in financial models as well. And that's going to, again, help to drive adoption of IoT. Next slide, please. So just to finish, this is some of the reports that we've produced and I've shown some information from today. And just really to say that I think construction isn't, of course, just about bricks and mortar, and it hasn't been for a while. I mean, as a society, we've always expended enormous amounts of capital on buildings that display different messages like power or pride in our identity. But I think increasingly in the future, we're going to see our buildings display messages that are ones of purpose and function. Yeah, and that really concludes my presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you, James. What a way to kick off our summit. Thank you for those insights. James, before I take some of these questions, and thank you for sending in those questions, I've got some really good ones from our audience. But before we do that, I'd like to take a look at a poll. So please, I'll direct you to taking the second poll, the question being, are you implementing or planning to implement a smart building project yourselves? So tell us where you are from already implementing all the way to not yet, okay? And then we'll take a look at the results of that poll by the end of this Q&A session with you. But we got questions. The first question from Tuomas, and thank you, Tuomas, for sending this. What advice would you give to a company looking to start with a building IoT project?
Yeah, this is something that I get asked quite a lot. I think it's really important. I think a lot of people assume that, you know, these type of building technology projects are going to be expensive. And, you know, let's be honest, like a lot of equipment that goes into buildings is expensive. It does require a lot of capital expenditure. But actually, I think we're seeing, and I mentioned occupancy analytics before, and again, I think that's a good example of, you know, something you can actually try on a small test level, right? So you could maybe take one floor of your building or a part of your building, you know, put in some sensors with software. Most likely it will be, you know, cloud-based software as a service. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be too expensive. Test it, see what works, see if it's giving you the data you need, and then iterate. And that would be, I think, a good place to start.
Thank you. And Mark, John is sending you kudos for saying really insightful views. Good point by Memoori. Is the purpose of the building right for you? Indeed, that is a key question, purpose. Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
But Patrick asks you a question. Patrick asks you this. Is it really that short life cycle for the design and build? How big projects is the report related to?
Well, that diagram I showed you, I mean, that's an average of buildings. Do vary, of course. Like, for example, let's say in a large hospital project, you know, that's a big undertaking. It's probably going to take longer. Likewise, the smaller commercial buildings may take less. So, I mean, we're talking on average somewhere in the region of 5 years, depending on the building.
And what's your forecast for the future, James, in terms of, you know, the current state of progress in developing smart buildings and smart buildings technology and solutions? Where are we? And where are we going?
Yeah, I think we you know, again, is it like give it a B-, I guess. That would be my score.
Okay,
at the
good.
moment.
All right.
No, I mean, what I'm saying is, of course, like, you know, one of the things about this business is, you know, we're not starting with a blank sheet of paper. And I think I'm, you know, alluded to that within the presentation. There are stakeholders within construction, you know, who are trying to digitize, who are trying to evolve. It's difficult. But of course, then we're getting, you know, an influx of new companies, new startups with understand technology as well. They're helping to energize the business. So yeah, I think the future's pretty bright, but there are challenges to be sorted out for sure.
I was once a B- student, and I turned out to be an A student. You know, there's
There you
room
go.
for growth, and that's only a good thing. And again, people really seem to like your take around purpose. Jack sending you also, buildings really need to have purpose, not just for desk and coffee. So there you go. Not just for that, there is a greater purpose to these buildings, and thank you for bringing that forward. Also, looking at the results of our poll quickly here, already implementing 40%. So we have very active people and planning to deploy within the next 3 months, 24%. So that's 64% already with a lot of skin in the game, but 28% are still thinking. So this is actually maybe a B- turnout on the poll. You are correct. James, thank you so much for your time today. That's very, very good.